Okay, good morning.
Rabbi.
Okay, good morning. Okay, we're going to start on the speakerphone, but if the sound quality is problematic, just send me a text and we can switch the audio model because I know that sometimes it works better than others. So just, again, text me if the sound is not good. Okay, let's begin. So, okay, we talked about Uvdin the Chol, right? Things that was the last small subset of non-biblical malacha, right? Things that are not part of the 39 biblical categories of forbidden work, but are nevertheless prohibited rabbinically because they have a weekday, workday presentation. So, in most of the examples involve using a weekday tool for a permissible activity. So, like brushing your hair with a soft brush, soft enough that it won't pull out the hair, but if it's the same brush you use during the week, better not to use it, better to have a designated brush for Shabbos. Same thing with a soft toothbrush without water or toothpaste. Technically not a problem, but some people prefer to have a Shabbos toothbrush. Using a potato masher to mash eggs, because they don't grow from the ground, could be cut, it could be ground, but if you use a fork, using a potato masher, because it's a weekday kind of tool, is not a good idea. And then there are certain actions that are also not forbidden, but they have a weekday appearance, like cutting a piece of wood, not being cut to any particular shape or size, and if the wood is, for whatever reason, not muktzah. So let's say, I can envision, let's say you have a broken chair, a broken wooden chair, and you want to pick it up and smash it further. So there's really nothing that doesn't fall into any of the categories of forbidden work. You're not tearing any letters, you're not creating a usable item, you're not grinding, you're not cutting anything to size, you're not deconstructing a structure because it's already broken. But, we all have this intuitive sense that breaking a chair for no reason is not Shabbos-dik, as we say. And indeed, it's not Shabbos-dik. It's only the Chol. It's a weekly type of activity. Okay, so that was that. The last thing, I don't know if we spoke, was the really last thing, was Molid, creation. Right? Now, creation sounds very fundamental, but there is no actual form of work known as creation on Shabbos, although that's the underlying principle of all of the malachas, all the forbidden forms of work. From the Torah, all 39 categories are in some way creative or constructive in terms of how we manipulate the physical world around us. But just creating something is not one of those 39 categories, but there is a rabbinic concept of creation which is forbidden. So that basically means making something new or giving a new form to an existing thing. So, for example, crushing ice so that it melts into water. The water, it's giving it the transforming it to a new state. Melting fat to liquefy it. Again, we're not talking about cooking, which is of course forbidden, but let's say you're not really going to heat it up very high, but you're going to have it just get warm enough to melt and become liquefied. That's creation of a new state. Some people say freezing water, like making ice cubes or ices, is questionable. It's a debate. Doesn't sound like there's a consensus on it. Infusing aroma into a garment. So, you can use deodorant on your skin, but you're not supposed to deodorize fabrics because you're infusing a scent, creating something new. Striking a match. Now, obviously, striking a match not allowed on Shabbos, but on Yom Tov, when we do use fire, you would think that striking a match is okay. Yet we know we always light, if we have a 2-day Yom Tov, we light a long-burning candle because for some reason, although using fire is completely permitted on Yom Tov, but striking a match is not. I never knew why, but the reason is, for the same reason, striking a match is creation of a new thing. So although using fire is permitted, lighting a fire is permitted, the creation of a fire is not permitted. So striking a match creates a fire out of nowhere. Lighting a campfire out of logs or igniting a gas stove with a match is not a problem if the match is already burning because you're not creating a new fire, you're just transferring an existing fire. So as long as you have a pilot light or a yard-tight candle or some method of obtaining fire, you can use it, but you can create the fire out of nothing. Some people, again, this again is questionable. I think we do this. Personally, I think we asked about it years ago, but whipped cream, right? They have those spray cans that shoot out whipped cream. Some people also consider that creation because in the can you have a liquid. When you shake it, you hear the liquid rattling around, and some kind of technological magic turns it into whipped cream when you squirt it out of the nozzle. So some say it's a form of creation. But again, that's questionable. Okay. The next section is different topic. Doing work before Shabbos. Right? Well, why would that be a problem? It isn't. But sometimes the work that you start before Shabbos continues on Shabbos. And we all deal with these kinds of things on an everyday basis. Right? Well, let's say you plant a seed in your field, and that seed grows over the next 3 months. Obviously, it's going to grow on Shabbos. We all understand that that's not a problem. Right? More to the point, let's say you have a sprinkler system, and you turn it on Friday, and it waters your lawn on Shabbos. That's also not a problem, because you set it up before Shabbos. The fact that you may be walking home from shul and you see the water watering the plants, that's not a problem. You obviously can't adjust. You can't raise the water level on Shabbos, just like you can't turn it on Shabbos. You could lower the water level on Shabbos because you're simply terminating the work. You can lower the water, right? On Shabbos. Yeah, because you're not using electricity, and you're simply restricting the water flow. There's no malacha of the watering plants falls under the category of planting. It's causing the growth of the plant. There's no form of work called unplanting. Now, contrast that with fire. Right? If you have an oil lamp and you add more oil into the reservoir, that is forbidden on Shabbos, because that's like lighting a fire, even though the fire is already burning and it will burn for many hours. But since by adding in more oil, it will burn for even more hours, that's considered work. Drawing oil out of the reservoir is also considered work, because that's like extinguishing a fire. Even though fire is still burning, it will continue to burn for many hours, but now it will burn for shorter. Let the oil out. That's because both igniting and extinguishing are forms of work. So adding or subtracting to the amount of fuel is forbidden. Whereas when it comes to planting is a form of work, so increasing the water flow is a problem. But unplanting, there's nothing called unplanting. So decreasing the water flow is not a problem. Fire is a good example, right? You can light a candle on Friday afternoon and have it burn on Shabbos. We all know that. That's the whole basis of Shabbos candles. That's not a problem. Dyeing, the Gemara talks about how they would dye fabrics. They put the wool into a vat, and it would have to sit there for a certain period of time to absorb the color. If you stick the wool into the vat before Shabbos and it sits there for many hours and continues to absorb the color on Shabbos, it's not a problem. Trapping, you set a mouse trap or a deer trap or a bear trap, whatever it is that you want to trap. Even if it may catch something on Shabbos, that's not considered a problem. And squeezing, you can put grapes into a wine press, and you put the weight on it, and at least in those days, they relied on gravity. The weight of the heavy block of wood or whatever it was would bear down on the grapes and squeeze them, and that might be a process taking several hours, and it may continue during the course of Shabbos, but it's not forbidden for me to have that going on. Putting grain into a mill, it gets ground over the course of time.
Is this all for personal use or have a business?
It doesn't matter. With business activities, if a person is trying to make money, there could be additional issues, because doing work for pay on Shabbos might be. Although, in this case, I don't imagine it's a problem, because the work that's being paid for is presumably on contract. The person is being paid for the product, not for the hours. So if somebody gives me wool, for example, and asks me to dye the wool, and I happen to put it in the vat before Shabbos, so what? There's no reason that I can't bill the person for the coloring of the wool, just because I was allowed to do the process and allow it to complete on Shabbos, there's no reason I should be allowed to charge the person for the process. What gets it more problematic is if I'm actually working, right? I'm a waiter or I'm a balkore or whatever it is, and I'm doing a service on Shabbos and I'm getting paid for it. There is a distinct prohibition of Skar Shabbos. There are workarounds to allow that, but that's where my actual time of Shabbos work is being paid for. Now, there's a couple of situations where starting something on Shabbos, on Friday to continue Shabbos is not so okay. So, for example, cooking. There are some restrictions on cooking which begins on Friday and continues into Shabbos because the principle is that when you start a process that generally requires some intervention later on, you shouldn't start that process on Friday if the natural procedure will be that you'll have to continue it on Shabbos. So cooking, and the rabbis understood that they all, even if they weren't in the kitchen, but they knew people who were, and they understood that when you set a pot on the fire, you don't just walk away and come back 2 hours later and have food to eat. Well, some men believe that, but the reality is there's someone there, monitoring, adjusting. And the rabbi said, I'm going to put the pot on the fire before Shabbos, and I have no problem, because we know that that's not the way it works. You come back, you uncover, you cover the lid, you raise the flame, you lower the flame, you stir the pot. And that's why, hence the idea of Lazlach. It would be a whole complex discussion that we can get into later. But the idea was reflecting the fact that although you may be putting up the food before Shabbos, that's not the end of the story. There has to be certain safeguards in place, because otherwise we know that naturally this is a recipe for a problem. Similarly, you shouldn't pour concrete just before Shabbos, since the process of hardening the concrete typically requires you to add water after some period of time. As the concrete hardens, you add more water, solidify it. Actually, after it dries, you solidify. Okay, and that would be a form of building. So, since the process of concrete does typically include some later interventions, that shouldn't be done. Also, certain things are noisy and publicly visible. We call this a Zilzal Shabbos, denigrating the spirit of Shabbos. So you're not supposed to do things that are kind of very upfront on Shabbos. So for example, the person has a water mill, right, a cement mixer, a wood chipper, right, and you set it up before Shabbos. You have a whole tree. You're feeding into this machine and spitting out wood chips. Then once it's finished, it will shut off on its own. I'm going to go to shul and I'll leave my wood chipping. Can't do that because it's noisy and loud in the street, and it's got a very obvious demonstration of work being done. A water mill is like a person puts grain in the mill, and the water turns the water wheel, but there's this loud, noisy grinding action of these stones grinding the grain, so I shouldn't let that run on Shabbos. He says not to use a washer or dryer. Now, I have to check into that, because we sometimes do that. Maybe we're wrong, or maybe there's different opinions. He says that you shouldn't set your washer or dryer to run shortly before Shabbos because it's noisy. And he also says not. Okay, let's see.
That would mean, Rabbi, that if you have non-Jewish servants working and doing those things, they still shouldn't do it.
So it talks about. So the argument that he's talking about, the kind of denigrating the Shabbos, would presumably apply regardless of who's running the machine. I know there are discussions in Shulchan Aruch about non-Jewish servants, doing sewing or repairing shoes and stuff like that. And in some cases they might be doing it for their own clothing. And there is a Maras Ayin issue. This issue here is not so much Maras Ayin. The fact that it's noisy and public is, I believe, even if it's understood as typically, water mills operate by themselves. So someone passes by and hears the mill grinding, there's no reason for them to think that you did anything wrong, but it's just not in the spirit of Shabbos. There's a separate issue with the non-Jewish help that people will think that you asked them to do it for you on Shabbos. That's separate.
Oh.
But, okay.
Yeah, that was a lawnmower guy. He comes sometimes.
Yeah. One more thing he discusses is that you're allowed to do something on Friday if it will cause a reaction on Shabbos, even if it's simultaneous. How could that be? Let's say it's Friday afternoon here, but it's Shabbos even Friday night in Israel, and I want to send a fax. Remember faxes? I want to send a fax to Israel, so somebody's machine is going to be printing out this paper on Shabbos that I'm sending now. That's okay. I can call someone in China, even if in China it's Shabbos right now. Or when Shabbos is over, I can call a non-Jew in California. However, I can't do that if the person at the other end of the line is going to be a Jew, even if it's a Jew who doesn't keep Shabbos. Obviously, he's answering the phone. It's safe to say he doesn't keep Shabbos. That doesn't justify my calling him because I know that I am causing him to violate Shabbos. He actually says it would be deriving benefit from the Shabbos transgression. A little bit of a different argument. Not so much because I'm causing him to sin, but because even for me, the sin to benefit from a Shabbos violation. Okay.
This state of message machine is allowable from the point of view that you're reading someone a message.
Yeah, so I think according to what he's saying, it would be similarly permitted if the place that I'm calling from, it's not Shabbos. In fact, the place that I'm calling to, it is Shabbos. Doesn't matter. I can leave a message. And I guess they'll get it when they get it, even if they get it on Shabbos. So what? Nobody's violating anything. I'm not doing anything wrong, and neither are they. Suppose if the other person's going to answer the phone and they're doing something wrong, and I'm okay.
On the person too, they will pick up the message on Shabbos.
Yeah.
And you
Shouldn't do that.
It's problematic. I mean, we've had this question. If you send out an email on Friday afternoon, let's say, it could even be the shul newsletter, and you're a little late getting it out, and some people need it for Shabbos, but there are going to be people who will open and read it on Shabbos. I think Eli Welcher advised, right? That should do it anyways because it benefits people. There's Torahs in there, and there's no guarantee people will open it on Shabbos. But we try not to send them too late in the day. Okay. As far as timers, that's another example of something which you set up on Friday and act on Shabbos, and that's okay. The main thing to remember is that you got to set it up before Shabbos, and even once it's set up, you can't adjust the timer settings on Shabbos. But there are some potential exceptions, but that's for later discussion. Basically, since you're curious, basically the adjusting, it kind of like the example we gave before with the oil. Taking oil out of a lamp is forbidden on Shabbos. Adding oil to a lamp is also forbidden on Shabbos, even though at the moment that I'm either adding or subtracting oil, there's no visible change in the flame, and there won't be any change for several hours. But since after several hours pass, and the fire starts to burn low, so whether there was more or less oil will make a difference. Fire will either go out or continue burning. So by adding more oil, I'm making it last longer. Taking away oil, I'm making it last shorter. So those are both forbidden activities. With a timer, so an electrical appliance is on, and I'd like to extend the time so well, I'd like to turn off sooner, so I know enough to know that I can't press the off switch or pull out the plug. But what I could do is I could take the timer. Timer is set to have it turn off in 3 hours, and just move the dial a little. It turns off in 2 hours.
Don't think that those little flips.
So in principle, I cannot do that, because if I move the timer or I move the clip, and now the item shuts off sooner, it's the same thing as taking oil out of a lamp.
Right.
Same thing if I cause it to turn on sooner, it's like adding oil to a lamp. However, there is an argument that says that if the lamp is on and it's supposed to turn off in 2 hours, so there's an off pin, and I just take away the off pin. What I've essentially done is I've removed a potential change that would have taken place if I hadn't removed it. But there was an off pin that is going to be circling around the face of the clock, and in 3 hours it will contact the switch and turn it off. I removed that pin, so that thing won't happen.
On Shabbos,
So I nipped the process in the bud. So there is an argument that says I'm allowed to do that, because I have not changed anything. I haven't sort of added fuel to the fire, so to speak. But the thing will stay on longer, not because I put more fuel in it, simply because I removed something that would block I removed something that would eventually turn it off. I stopped an action from happening. So similar sense, if something's off,
and I was afraid to do it.
if something's off and it's going to be turned on, and I take out the pin so it doesn't turn on until later, same thing. I'm simply preserving the existing state. Now, what you have to be careful about, not everyone agrees that it's okay, but what everyone agrees is not okay is that, let's say I wanted to turn off later. So it's supposed to turn off in 2 hours. I want it to turn off in 3 hours, so I'll take out the pin and I'll put it at the 3 hour mark. That's not okay. Because the moment to take out the pin, the thing is scheduled to stay on. I put the pin back in at the 3 hour mark. I am now putting in something that will make it turn off. The fact that pin was there a minute ago at the 2 hour mark doesn't matter, because I took it out. Once I took it out, it doesn't naturally go back in. In a similar vein, if it's even worse, if it's supposed to turn on in an hour and I don't need it to turn on yet, I want it to turn on a little bit later than that, I take out the on pin. That's certainly fine. Then I put it back 2 hours later. So I just actively caused the appliance to turn on, in a few hours from now, because once I took the pin out, it was going to turn off. There was no way to stop it. It was going to stay off, and now I'm just like, for the first time, as if it were for the first time, I'm putting in a pin. So that's not allowed. So removing a pin is sometimes okay. Adding a pin is never okay.
In other words, causing it to shut off sooner. First pin causing it to stay on.
Right. Okay.
Or
Yeah, better off to do it before.
Rabbi Gaffney. Take care of it before Shabbos.
Yeah.
Can I help him, Rabbi? Take care of it.
Yeah. Yes. There is that time.
At that moment in time when I'm worried about it and I want to do it, I'm afraid that my desire might overwhelm my critical thinking.
Yeah, right. We all have that vulnerability. There's a discussion about using timers for things other than lights. Some people, and I think most people, you can say you can put anything on a timer, a crock pot, an air conditioner. Probably Rav Moshe Feinstein did not like that idea. He was afraid. It sounds like the issue would be that it enables too much leeway to get around the Shabbos restrictions, and Shabbos ends up becoming too similar to what we do. As we all know, right? We all have timers, and for us, Shabbos is just the same as every other day, right? It makes life so easy that you can pretty much do anything you want with a timer. Just kidding. Just kidding. But you know,
The question, like a lot of people, ever since that fire in Brooklyn, we just have our blood on a timer because we don't want it running when we're sleeping.
Right. Yeah, I was being tongue in cheek, but you know, most people I think do not say. They say, look, we all use timers, and you know, Shabbos is still pretty distinctive. But that was the argument that some of the, of course, like Rav Moshe Feinstein held that it's too much latitude. He also said he compared it to asking a non-Jew to do work. Interesting. He makes an analogy. I don't know. Yeah, we had them there.
Record things they want to see.
Yeah.
That's led to some people putting it
Right. There is a.
Yeah, and then until they were told it's not Shabbos.
Yeah.
Even if it's okay.
Right. He says most people do use timers for air conditioning, and many of the poskim don't accept this full stringency. But it's just, you know, there is something to that. You know, we should think about how extensively we want to use timers and recognize in the spirit of Shabbos, you know, we may want to reduce it to the necessity.
The air conditioner contains this mechanism.
Yeah. He says most people do set air conditioners. He doesn't see it as a definitive prohibition. He says that, you know, we think about the spirit of Shabbos, what we want to promote.
You do it at night, so in the morning you don't need to hear it out
Right.
Yeah, like we have programmable thermostats, but I actually don't program them. But is that a problem? Programmable thermostat on your heating and air